If learning your scales always seemed boring, then you probably weren't studying the pentatonic scale. It's a series of notes loved almost ubiquitously, crossing into nearly every genre of popular music I can think of. Sometimes its use is compositional, while other times it's reserved for a soloist's improvisation. Either way, the pentatonic scale is incredibly important for a guitarist to learn. Hi, I'm Aaron Keen, and in today's music lesson, we're going to observe one of the best ways to learn the pentatonic scale, the 2-note per string pentatonic box. Let's start by defining the term pentatonic, the scale that it implies, and using the relative shortcut to make our understanding a little easier. Penta, being the prefix for 5, and tonic, meaning in reference to tones, simply means 5 notes. But it's not just any 5 notes thrown together. It's 5 specific notes taken or altered from the major scale. They break down into 2 main categories, major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. The major pentatonic scale uses the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 6th note of the major scale, while the minor pentatonic uses its 1st, flatted 3rd, 4th, 5th, and flatted 7th. However, this in no way doubles our workload, as a reordering of one major pentatonic scale also easily defines a minor pentatonic scale. Take a C major pentatonic scale, for example. A C major scale contains the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Take the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 6th note from that, and you have C, D, E, G, and A, a C major pentatonic scale. To use a shortcut, if you reorder the notes starting at scale degree 6, or A, you have an A minor pentatonic scale. But instead of taking my word for it, let's use the formula. An A major scale contains the notes A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. The 1st is A, flatting the 3rd is C, the 4th is D, the 5th is E, and flatting the 7th is G. This relationship between the C major and A minor pentatonic scales are known as relative major or relative minor to each other. And to summarize, if you reorder a major pentatonic starting on its 6th, you get its relative minor. If you reorder a relative minor starting on its flat 3rd, you get its relative major. Sorry for the long preface, but understanding this is a prerequisite for getting the most out of your 2-note per string pentatonic box. So then, what's a pentatonic box? Now that we have an understanding of what notes make up the scale, it's time to apply them to a fretboard. And as a guitarist looking for the most efficient way to move through the scale, I'm looking to minimize the amount of shifting I have to do to play the greatest range of these set of notes. When I play an ascending scale that employs a lot of shifting or hand position change over the fretboard, I invite the larger motions of the elbow joint and the shoulder rather than the subtle motions of the finger and wrist joints. This results in a more consistent timbre, which is important in its own right. However, it takes a far greater effort and quickly hits the ceiling, so to speak, in terms of pitch on a single string. So how do we keep from shifting? Well, the average scale length of a guitar is 24 to 26 inches, and that number greatly influences the stretch of frets easily reached by the average hand. Down at the 1st fret, any stretch that spans more than 4 or 5 frets is not only pretty challenging, but also made obsolete, given that the span of 6 frets could just be replaced by going 1 string thinner when ascending. In short, if we have to span more than 4 or 5 frets to go to the next higher note, we'll just change strings. Let's place the notes of an A minor pentatonic scale on top of a fretboard. When I look to order these notes on the fretboard with minimal shifting, it's easy to see an ascending pattern. 2 notes on the largest string, 2 notes on the A string, 2 notes on the D string, 2 notes on the G string, 2 notes on the B string, and to no surprise, 2 notes on the little E string. What results is this box, or actually a square-like pattern, that's 4 corners are defined by the lowest note on the largest string, to the lowest note on the highest pitch string, to the highest note on the highest pitch string, to the highest note on the lowest pitch string, and back to the lowest note on the lowest pitch string. Calling it a box is a little dubious with some of these shapes, but the important part is to learn movement that's 4 corners are defined by more finger and wrist motion rather than elbow and shoulder. It's a little abstract, but definitely pedagogically catchy. Now that we know what a pentatonic scale is, and how it's put in a box, it's high time we opened up these boxes. Box number 1, the career maker. It's easy to see why this is box number 1. No other box has the lowest note of each string all on the same fret. That detail alone not only makes it easier to learn, but it also gives your index finger the ability to form dyads and triads in the middle of a phrase. Many of the most iconic and legendary rock and blues guitarists have exploited this technique to great heights. Hence why I give it the name, the career maker. To learn these boxes, we'll start in the context of them being in C major, or the relative A minor, pentatonic scales. To ascend the scale in this box, we'll play the 5th fret and the 8th fret of the thickest string, the 5th fret and 7th fret of the A, D, and G strings, and the 5th and 8th fret of the B and little e strings. To descend the scale, we'll start with the 8th fret on the thinnest string and go down to the 5th fret. The B string will go from 8 to 5, the G, D, and A strings will go from 7th to 5th, and the big E string will go from the 8th fret to the 5th fret. As far as fingering goes, let the index finger get the lower pitched note of every string. For the strings that have a span of 4 frets, it's usually best to let the ring or pinky reach the higher pitched note, unless you are starting at a very high numbered fret. For the strings that have a span of 3 frets, the ring and pinky are obvious choices, but the middle finger can be a great choice too. Box number 2, the My Girl. Play the first 6 notes of this box and you'll get the name. To ascend the scale in this box, we'll play the 8th and 10th fret of the biggest string, the 7th and 10th fret of the A and D strings, the 7th and 9th fret of the G string, and the 8th and 10th fret of the B and little e strings. To descend, we do the same thing we did in box 1 for box 2. Make sure you start on the higher fret of each string, beginning with the thinnest string. Unlike box 1, the lowest note of each string doesn't occur on the same fret, making this a significantly harder pattern to pick up. Without the easy, consistent fingering of your index finger for every low note on each string, you now have a number of options. The first option is easy to understand, but a little harder to execute technically. It involves assigning 1 fret to each finger and being consistent in its usage. In this case, it would be that the index finger gets all the 7th fret notes, the middle finger gets all the 8th fret notes, the ring finger gets the one time you hit the 9th fret, and your pinky gets all the 10th fret notes. It's not what I would recommend for the majority of playing these boxes, but it can be helpful in some higher positions on the neck. The second option for learning how to traverse box 2 is more of what I would recommend once you start to memorize what frets to go to. In the second option, you let your index finger get the lowest note of every string, teaching it to stretch backwards from the 8th fret on the first string you play to the 7th fret on the A string. This may give you a couple of options for the higher note. You may find that your ring finger feels comfortable doing both of the string's high notes, or that you employ your pinky once you hit the A string. Whatever you choose, you can continue that for the next string. When you get to the G string, your index finger will still play the lower pitched note. And though you could easily use your ring finger, I would suggest you use your middle finger for the higher note. Doing this will set you up for the index finger being ready for the 8th fret easily on the last 2 strings, and as for the higher notes in the last 2 strings, I would usually leave that to the ring finger. Again, option 1 is certainly easier to understand, but there are anatomical reasons why it's better for your technique to lean more towards using your index finger more creatively, rather than forcing a fret assignment strategy. That is, though it is important to develop dexterity in your pinky, the dynamic of your middle and pinky finger will almost certainly never be as reliable and powerful as your index finger and ring finger working together. Box number 3, the shifty rule breaker. The shifty rule breaker starts off easy. The first 3 strings all span the same 3 frets, 10, 12, 10, 12, 10, 12. When you get to the G string, the lower note of the string shifts back to 9, so you play 9, 12. What makes box 3 unique is that it's the only one of our pentatonic boxes that demands a position shift between the G and B strings. Even though box 2 with its second option fingering did some position shifting, this one has a blatant 1 fret readjustment for not just the lower note, but the higher note too. So again, the G string is 9, 12, but the B string is 10, 13. The last string stays in this newly shifted position, but just plays a 10, 12. When descending, you play a 12-10 on the little string, 13-10 on the B string, and now you have to shift backwards to 12 and 9 on the G string. After that shift on the way back, it's pretty smooth sailing. You just have 12-10, 12-10, 12-10 all the way down. If you choose option 1 of fingering by fret assignment, you absolutely have to adjust that idea when you go to the B string. So option 1 would have my index finger playing the 9th fret, my middle finger playing the 10th frets, my ring finger hanging out over the 11th fret, and my pinky playing the 12th fret. Once you get to the B string, everything gets moved up 1. So now my fingering has my index playing the 10th fret, my middle over the 11th, my ring over the 12th, and my pinky over the 13th. To reiterate, option 1 may be easier for some people to conceptualize the box. However, I think it's more important for your technique to teach the index finger to deal with the lower notes of each string in the box. So option 2 would look like this. My index finger takes the lowest note of each string, and the higher note is done by either my middle or ring finger. It's also completely fine to use your pinky for the higher notes. I often do. Box number 4, the easy till it's not. This box is pretty easy until it's not. The first 4 strings when ascending all have the same lower fret, the 12th. 12-15 on the biggest string, 12-15 on the A string, 12-14 on the D and G strings, and then things start to get a little complicated. Using option 1 fingering, you would use your middle and pinky for the 13th and 15th frets of the B string. You would then use your index finger and pinky for the 12th and 15th frets of the little E string. This works fine, though it is pretty difficult at first to go between the 12-14 on the G string using your index and ring finger to the 13-15 on the B string with your middle and pinky. It's a pretty decent option that can teach you a lot in finger independence and dexterity. Option 2 fingering would have your index finger shift up to the 13th fret of the B string, letting your ring finger play the higher note on the B string, and then having your index finger reach back to the 12th fret of the little E string, leaving the higher note to your ring finger or pinky. You could also have preceded this by using your middle finger on the 14th fret of the G string before bringing the index finger up to the 13th fret of the B string. This is similar to what we did on the same 2 strings of box number 2. Descending this with option 1 can be difficult in the same way it was ascending. Box number 5, that comes in pairs. We could easily do box 5 starting on the 15th and 17th frets, but just in case anybody has a guitar that doesn't quite go that high easily, we're going to jump down to the 3rd fret of the thickest string to start. This box is super easy. The first 2 strings are 3-5-3-5, the next 2 strings are 2-5-2-5, and the last 2 strings are 3-5-3-5. Remember our fingering options. In this case, option number 1, which is a strict fret to finger assignment, is especially difficult this low on the neck, so I really wouldn't recommend it unless it feels really comfortable for you. Depending on your hand size and the scale length of the guitar, it'll vary. Instead, we can just use our index finger for the lowest note of each string and our ring or pinky for the higher notes. Of course, your middle finger can cover a higher note too, if you want that note to have an attack that only the strength of the middle finger can provide. Now that we've got a good understanding of how to play the boxes in C major/A minor, we need to learn how to use different size boxes. Try taking one of the boxes and shifting it up 1 fret. Moving up 1 fret only slightly decreases the distance you have to stretch, but on the more difficult boxes to learn, that might be enough to throw off your accuracy in performing it cleanly. It's still the same box, only it's smaller. Try moving a box down 1 fret from the original position. Now the stretch between the high and low note of each string takes a little more effort. Again, it's the same box, only bigger. Shifting a box all the way up or down the neck is a great way to teach your hand the subtle differences in stretch from high to low notes in a box. And doing this with all 5 boxes takes a good deal of time, but it's well worth it. You may notice that the fingering you choose for smaller boxes feels different than their larger counterparts. I find my pinky shows up on more of the larger boxes, and my ring finger shows up on more of the small boxes. Again, no hard and fast rules on this, as there are way too many variables between hand size and scale length on the guitar. Okay, here we are. Provided you've confidently memorized all 5 boxes and all of their larger and smaller variations, it's time to start stacking these boxes. When you first learn all 5 boxes in the key of C major/A minor, there's a detail you may or may have not noticed that's worth discussing. The side of box 1 that's made up of the higher pitched note on every string lines up with the side of box 2 that makes up the lower pitched note on every string. This relationship is the same between box 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and 5 back to 1. The inverse of this is also true. The side of box 1 that's made up of the lower pitched note on every string lines up with the side of box 5 that's made up of the higher pitched note on every string. It's the same for boxes 5 and 4, 4 and 3, 3 and 2 back to 1. In order to usefully incorporate this observation into your playing, we need to use the shared side between these two boxes as a transition point for each string. Today, we're going to practice that transition using the 2-box loopback. Start on the biggest string in box 1. Ascend all the way to its highest note. Replace the finger on that highest note in box 1 to your index finger. Now you're in box 2 on the highest string, but the lowest pitched note within that box. Now go to the highest pitched note on that string to begin the descent of box 2. After you make your way down to the thickest string in box 2, striking the lower note on that string, replace that finger with your ring or pinky. You are now on the highest pitch note of the lowest string of box 1. Go to the lower pitch note of box 1 and you've made one loop. Now for the second loop, we'll go from the lowest pitch note of box 1 all the way up to the higher pitch note on the B string. Replace the finger on that higher pitch note on the B string with our index. Now we are in box 2. See the pattern? You'll then go from the highest note in box 2 on the B string before turning around and going all the way down to the thickest string's lowest note in box 2. You'll do the same transition to get back to the beginning of box 1, only to go up to the G string on this third loop. We'll continue this pattern going up to the D string and around, the A string and back, and just for fun, connecting box 1 and 2 on only the big E string. That's the 2-box loopback. There are many ways you can practice the transition between two different boxes, and this is just one of them. You can also do this in reverse order, starting at the highest pitch note of box 2, going to the bottom and shifting down to the beginning of box 1, only to go back to the top of box 1, the top of box 2, and descend now only to the A string. Continue this pattern until you've made the box change on every string. Doing the 2-box loop back between boxes 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and 5 back to 1 will give you plenty of practice connecting these, especially when you consider adding the element of different size boxes. To recap, we know the 5 boxes, we've practiced moving them larger and smaller, and now we know how to stack 2 of them on top of each other. However, in order to use them in a song, we need to take a closer look inside. And at the risk of making this feel like math, but be easily applied to the key of a song, or a chord within a song, let's use a couple of variables. Let's say X equals X major pentatonic scale, and Y equals Y minor pentatonic scale. Box 1, the career maker, unsurprisingly has 3 X's and 3 Y's, more than any other box. You can find X on the higher pitch note of the big E string, the lower pitch note of the G string, and the higher pitch note on the little E string. You can find Y on the lower pitch note on the big E string, the higher note of the D string, and the lower pitch note on the little E string. In box 2, the My Girl, you can find X on the lower pitch note of the E string, the higher pitch note on the D string, and the lower pitch note of the little E string. You can find Y on the lower pitch note of the D string, and the higher pitch note of the B string. In box 3, the shifty rule breaker, you can find X on the lower pitch note of the D string and the higher pitch note of the B string. You can find Y on the higher pitch note of the A string and on the lower pitch note of the B string. In box 4, the easy till it's not, you can find X on the higher pitch note of the A string and the lower pitch note of the B string. Y can be found on the lower pitch note of the A string and the higher pitch note of the G string. Box 5, that comes in pairs, has 2 X's, one on the lower pitch note of the A string and one on the higher pitch note of the G string. Y has 3 locations, on the higher pitch note of the big E string, the lower pitch note of the G string, and the higher pitch note of the little E string. If you're looking to use a major pentatonic box in a certain key, line up any X within that box with the right letter on the fretboard. And for any minor pentatonic box, just line up the Y with the key of the song. In a later video, we'll dig into the many creative uses that the pentatonic scale has, and trust me, the box can hold far more than we've covered today. If you have any questions or success stories learning or using these pentatonic boxes, just let me know in the comments. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into what I believe is one of the best ways to conceptualizing one of music's most beloved scales on this episode of Aaron Keen's Music Lessons.